Okay, check. We are back. This is your guy Marcellus Ease. And yeah, episode 5, organic algorithms. And we got a lot on the docket for today. I'm not gonna lie, hip hop is kind of lit right now. We got beefs. But before we get to that Drake beef, man, I just want to talk about Kanye West and his ability to actually sell product, man. It's undeniable at this point. I mean, for Addias to kind of backpedal away from him after he made certain comments about, you know, certain religious groups. But at the end of the day, I believe Kanye West knows that they're so profit driven that they're going to spin the block around and come right back to him in order to sell those shoes. And it shows you how the landscape overall just changed. A lot of institutions are kind of grappling with the fact that consumers nowadays are not necessarily brand loyal, but they're kind of more addicted to personalities, or just kind of lean towards more of the personalities. I don't know if social media has anything to do with it, due to the fact that it does give personalities an ability to reach people and kind of be more vulnerable, less corporatized. But before we get to what Kanye had to say about Addias, check out how crazy Kanye is. The fact that he left Alex Jones speechless. I mean, you can't even stop Alex Jones from shutting the fuck up, but Jesus Christ. Check out right here as he leaves Alex Jones with just no words to say. Conspiracy Alex Jones got nothing to say. That's how bugged out Kanye is. But you guys check it out.
And then I'm gonna say something. All right.
You're not only an artist, you're a comedian. But Nick, that's what I'm getting at here is that is that it was a it doesn't matter.
I don't like the word evil next to Nazis. I think we need to look at.
Oh my goodness! Just because you don't like one group doesn't mean the other. But look,
I love Jewish people, but I also love Nazis.
Oh man! Well, I have to disagree with that. Hey, but listen, we're gonna go to break. I'm the crazy one here. We're all crazy. The whole world's crazy.
Yo, Alex Jones don't even know what the fuck to say. I mean, Kanye West is bugged out. But let's not forget, as I alluded to earlier, that things nowadays are more personality driven. And I believe Kanye West understood that it was his name that was selling the Yeezys, not necessarily Addias. Addias does have the infrastructure to sell it with the factories, the distribution, getting the products made. But the fact that they gave him such a low royalty rate of 10 to 15% on the net sales of the shoes, and they have all the numbers of just all the control costs, the shipping, the factories, the employees, they can actually inflate these very similar to what he's seen from record labels, how they inflated the marketing, the studio time, etc., in order to cut Kanye West a more diminished rate of return on his sales. But there's consequences of just messing up the business of Addias like that. A Fortune 500 company where Kanye West leaving them affected their stock value. It's to the point where they're so profit driven that they actually came back around, try to sell the Kanye shoes. They really needed his name and his face attached to it. And they end up just scrapping the whole plan, selling whatever they could, giving Kanye back his Yeezy brand as far as the name, but keeping the design of the shoes underneath their copyright or just their overall infrastructure. They keep all that stuff, the patents, any type of technology on the boost, on the shoes, etc. But even though they give Kanye West back his Yeezy brand, there's going to be unfortunate consequences of it. And there was already telltale signs when we seen Kanye West actually get debanked. I've never seen no shit like that. Debanked? We're talking about a multi-millionaire. He has millions of dollars, what he said, in Chase Bank or whatever bank he had, and they debanked him after his anti-Semitic comments. I've never seen that before. But here's Kanye West talking about some of the issues he's been having beyond just selling clothes or just trying to put his Yeezy product out. He released the album and they actually yanked it off of streaming services. Sometimes the people who own the original sample kind of lets the money pile up, then they sue, then they collect all the money that was previously made. But I've never seen this before. They just sued right away and they instantly yanked the music out of streaming services. And this is after him possibly going #1 that week. But you guys check out him speaking on it, and every once in a while I'll check in.
Yo, this Ye. We just sold out the United Center in 7 minutes. And I just wanted to express to everybody out there to see if it's anyone that can help with this. It's the only arena that I had access to in the past year. And when I call, people say there's no avails for me. And you know why that is. So if there's anybody out there that can help with this, please.
Keep in mind, there's companies out there like BlackRock who own a percentage of everything. So Kanye West messing up that Adidas stock, it probably definitely affected them. And you know, they own percentages in institutional things like these stadiums, streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music. So Kanye West kind of getting blackballed institutionally shouldn't be a shocker. But United Center in Chicago is one of his only few venues that allowed him to perform there. That's kind of crazy. We're talking about Kanye West here. But he also alluded to not being able to do this alone. Once again, man, what does Kanye expect? You're going to get blocked on an institutional level.
Life is not a solo project. And I believe that being the single richest black man in the world cannot secure your position in order to move people.
Now, right now, that's self-proclaimed richest black man because I don't know how Forbes did it, but they somehow counted El Chapo's money to actually give him a ranking within Forbes magazine. But yet they went out of their way and released separate articles debunking that Kanye West was an actual billionaire. I've never seen no shit like this. But it wouldn't shock me if to be on Forbes magazine is like being on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It's usually a campaign that's ran for you, and you kind of donate, quote unquote, money to the cause of that campaign, and all of a sudden you get your star of fame. And Forbes magazine, it doesn't strike me that they kind of work in a similar way. And a perfect example of this is Kylie Jenner being 18 years old, fresh out of high school, and they said she was a billionaire. Oh man, that's crazy. Like Pusha T says, billionaires on TV. That shit don't make no sense to me.
A king needs an army, and it became an army. It was like, yo, Ty is with me. He came to my party, and I looked and I was like, yo, this dude is like,
shout out to Ty,
the head of the spaceship. You know what I mean? Like he's going like Han Solo.
That's what streaming companies think of us as the musicians, and all the label owners just hand it over. Right. You understand what I'm saying? Right. We ain't on that, bro. As long as I breathe, I'm here for all of my artists, all of my peers, and all the people. People get in the way. That's what the market does. They get in the way. The diamonds are infinite, but people make a market out of it and try to charge more. They make diamonds are girl's best friend. You see what I'm saying? They make the Twix bigger. They trying to make us fat. You know what I mean? Will lose their jobs, lose their careers for taking the steps that we took. You know, we went down for like a year and a half. You know, people think that I got, kicked out of Addias for the tweet. We were having problems before. They were stealing my designs. They still trying to sue me. It's like, get right. Right. Get right. Be honest. Y'all gonna send me $100 million a year, then say that I misallocated the marketing. I was the marketing. Look at where y'all at now. Look at where we at right now. Y'all want to play? You're not gonna have me nap on the board. These companies, Gap, Balenciaga, they just want to use the celebrities and have us be like the polo man on the top of the horse. And everybody knows. Everybody felt what I felt. You know what I'm saying? I even said the apology, and they still f with me. You know what I'm saying? I said apology.
You hear that right there? He sent the apology, and they're still fucking with him. They're fucking with him on an institutional level. And it's interesting because in Drink Champs, Kanye had kind of alluded to offending, I believe, Donald Trump's son, David Kushner, or his son-in-law. He offended him by saying no, he didn't fuck his wife in front of like a bunch of people. And then Kushner, I believe a few months later, ended up buying a major stake in Kim Kardashian's Skims brand. He actually owned more of it than Kanye did. He went behind his back and bought a major stake in that brand. That's how connected That motherfucker is. He did not go back and forth with Kanye after he embarrassed him. He just affected his pockets. And this is the way Kanye should really be kind of going back and forth with people he has issues with. It shouldn't just be a bunch of ranting and trying to weaponize your fan base. That really doesn't do much. Not on that level.
Some of the stuff I was saying was true. So until y'all come up and say, yo, what he was saying, some of that was true, then go ahead with all that. But we got to a point where something needed to happen. Something needed to be said.
I believe that something needed to be said. That was Kanye trying to get out of that contract. That's what it's all about. It's not necessarily about the comments. He just made those comments so they can separate from him. He was trying to get out of that deal. Because at the end of the day, like he said, he is the marketing. He's the one that's selling the shoes. Why the fuck is he only collecting 10%?
Somebody need to say something. Now, if you're in an argument with somebody, you're not going to say everything the right way. But it got to a point where y'all ain't going to just keep running, start calling me bizarre and press for all these years. I got to the point, how many more times y'all going to call me crazy? How many more times y'all going to give me fake medication that makes me fat off of a misdiagnosis? When I'm really...
Man, at some point, Kanye's going to have to explain of how they put you in that deal where you're only collecting 10% of the net sales. Did they leverage the fact that they had all that institutional investments in the distribution, the factories around the world, the stores around the world? They leverage all that against you where you had to say, fuck, man, I got to do this and accept this 10% royalty rate. That's after all the expenses and everything else is paid. But Kanye, once again, he continues to weaponize his fan base. And like I said, on that level, it's definitely different types of games you got to play.
Let me explain really clear to you guys what's happening with Adidas. It's not only are they putting out fake colorways that are non-approved, they're suing me for $250 million, and they're also not paying me for these shoes that they're putting out that have my name on it. And they're using contract clauses and 50 years of business experience to rape an artist, one of y'all favorite artists, right in front of y'all in broad daylight.
And it's very important, man. That contract language is a motherfucker. These institutions definitely have a gang of lawyers that understand this type of contract language, and they'll put it in to finesse you. But the Yeezys cannot sell without Kanye West's cosign. And this is where the landscape, because of technology, aka social media, comes into play. Now, because of that, they really can't sell the shoes. Kanye could just broadcast himself and tell his whole audience not to fuck with the shoes. And I don't believe that there's ever been a celebrity on this level that has this type of influence on his fan base and their purchasing power or just their perception to purchase something. Kanye plays major influence on moving certain product. And I believe that's why Adidas had to double back around and actually continue with them even after he made the comments. Because if they were so bad, they should have never, ever messed with him ever again. No questions asked. But the real question, I'm surprised a lot of media like TMZ, etc. never asked Kanye, why is Adidas still doing business with you if your comments are so bad? Like, they're definitely outrageous, his comments, but Adidas faces no backlash from doubling back and doing business with Kanye. I'm shocked about that. But again, it's all about the perception. And speaking about perception, this media landscape is crazy right now. We see publications from Sports Illustrated to blogs and just magazines that used to cover fashion, music, art. They're all kind of struggling right now in this era of streaming or just adapting to the new media landscape, which is kind of short form video, maybe your articles or just your content spread out through multiple platforms. There's not a real way of monetizing these things. And on top of that, you gotta consider the political landscape, the fact that we have more awareness of just, I wouldn't necessarily say woke culture, but just people are more self-aware and more considerate of other people. And it is kind of sensitive. I'm not gonna lie. We are in sensitive times, and all these things kind of come into play here. But it's very interesting what's going on with the LA Times right now, because it seems like, you know, the person who originally purchased it, he has a daughter. Of course, the nepotism, he's going to put her in a key position, which I believe he should. If you own something, you should be able to put your kids in place and, you know, put them in a powerful position. Why the fuck not? That's the reason why you own it. But anyway, this billionaire's daughter is running the publication, but she's kind of running it in the quote unquote kind of social media woke culture way. And I don't believe, you know, she's kind of taken away from the business side of just making sure that, hey, this should get people reading this and people should take the information as valid information, not biased information coming from one particular side of the political or just the, I should say, political spectrum. And Adam Carolla, a guy from Comedy Central, I remember you seeing him on there. Man, that was a while ago, but he kind of has an interesting podcast. But let's check out what they had to say on the storyline of this billionaire's daughter kind of running the LA Times into the ground. And it's interesting with the children of these billionaires. We see it kind of with the Lakers out in public, with the Bus family. Once the father passed away, the kids not necessarily having the Lakers in a winning position from every season. And just overall, they can't even recruit free agents like that. LeBron actually chose to go there without them really recruiting him. He was going to go to LA the whole time. They lost out on Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, LaMarcus Aldridge. I mean, you guys can go down the history books and take a look at it. There was a lot of NBA players who originally wanted to go there, and then once they met up with them, they kind of changed their mind on it. But let's take a look at how they broke down what's going on with the LA Times, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
So what you see happening with the LA Times is kind of running in parallel with what you see about the entire publishing industry, in that it was kind of contaminated by this kind of youthful progressivism, that is just the dominant ethos of the people that work at, that have joined these organizations over the past 10, 15 years.
And it's not just because of that. We also have to consider a lot of them were running off the algorithms of Twitter and YouTube, aka Vice Media. They were actually getting a lot of their traffic because YouTube wanted to promote long form content, and they ended up promoting Vice. But once the algorithms changed, Vice actually struggled. And the same thing goes for, I would say, Complex Media with Twitter. Once Elon Musk purchased it and changed the algorithm, which he did, a lot of people were salty about it. It wasn't just the check marks. A lot of your favorite celebrities were not in favor, depending on their, I don't want to say political views, but depending on where they fell in the spectrum with Elon Musk. If they talked bad about him, trust me, they were no longer in the algorithm. When they promoted something, it didn't reach as far. But a lot of publications, I would say in the mid 2010s, actually got a boost because the social media platforms on their come up were actually promoting a lot of these media companies.
Even the older regime at these publications, even up to the New York Times, kind of drifted in the direction of the more youthful politics, right? It's almost like the tail wags the dog. And so you saw that happening with the LA Times. I mean, I have my theories on structurally why that's happened to all journalism. And I think to a certain extent, it's because with the shift from analog to digital, scarcity was released. And all of a sudden, when you go from printing 15, 17 stories a day to 200 stories a day, supply goes up and quality goes down, right? It's almost like a restaurant or a club. You have to let in more people to make the business model work. All of a sudden, the quality goes down. I think that's a major factor. So that was one factor that's present for the LA Times and just about all of the publishing. The LA Times was also one other catalyst that I think shockingly, almost nobody was aware, and that's kind of what gave rise to my thread and why it's become a popular one, in that the owner of the LA Times, a guy named Patrick Soon-Shiong, pretty low profile guy, strangely, given the things that he's involved in. He's an owner of the Lakers and an owner of the LA Times. He bought Magic Johnson's share in 2011. I forgot why Magic had to sell, but he had to sell about 5% of the Lakers. Patrick Soon-Shiong bought it. Very low profile guy for an owner of the Lakers. He buys the LA Times in 2018. As 2020 is coming along and we see the deterioration of Los Angeles, I'm trying to investigate what's happening here. And one of the things that I see at the LA Times is that there's a very prominent voice in the editorial room, and that's Patrick Soon-Shiong's daughter, Nika. Nika is the most cliched blueprint champagne socialist, guilt-ridden rich kid that ascribes herself to progressive politics very aggressively and just the most out-of-touch, broken, bankrupt worldview. And she was being very aggressive and almost kind of running the newsroom. And you saw that.
That's very interesting. And sometimes it's unfortunate for her. She doesn't realize that she's sitting in her own privilege and everyone could see it but her. She has the room to have certain worldviews or certain ideologies that she has because of her position in life, but she's not going to be able to see it. It's very unfortunate, but I'm pretty sure she has good intentions, but it is what it is.
It popped up most evidently in 2022 because there were LA elections that year. That was right just before those, the last time I was on describing this and when that thread came around. And it turns out that she's engineering some of the candidates for some of these positions in LA because they're friends of hers. It's a guy named Kenneth Mejia. He's the LA controller now. He's about 33 now. He was 31 when he was elected. He has no qualifications whatsoever, except for being friends with Nika Sooncheong, and was able to be engineered there because the LA Times endorsed him. Okay, had no business endorsing him. And people, as you mentioned, Adam mentions, people usually go to the LA Times for their news to see what's going on in LA. And while it no longer has the circulation or prestige it once had, in terms of endorsements and who gets elected in LA, still extremely powerful. You know how many candidates won in the 2020 elections that were not endorsed by the LA Times?
Tell us.
One person out of it's got to be at least 18 to 20 that was not endorsed by the LA Times once.
And in the mid 2010s, that's what a lot of these publications have become, major real estate for certain political candidates to come by and kind of get access to their audience. And the publications would sway that audience to actually consider that person as a quote unquote good guy. You know, this is how politics works. It's good guy versus the bad guy, but there is no such thing, even though there's no such thing as that. But at the end of the day, these publications serve as major real estate to sway a certain audience a certain way. The LA Times is a perfect leftist newspaper where they're gonna have major real estate on that audience for Democratic candidates that are trying to run. Or something like the Daily Wire, they're gonna sway, you know, people that towards the right to vote for certain candidates, etc. These are just major real estates. That's it. I mean, as I would say broadcast television kind of gets more antiquated and outdated, there's going to be new players. So some of that Fox News real estate is going to be taken up by the Daily Wire or just anyone in that spectrum. Same thing for CNN. The newer generations coming up, they're not necessarily watching that. They may be leftists, but they're going to gravitate towards other publications. Like that YouTube channel. I forgot what's the name of it, but they're like sort of left leaning. They're pretty popular among people who love politics or just political science majors, etc. Man, I'm not into none of that, but you guys get my drift.
The LA Times endorsements are still extremely powerful, and the people they're endorsing are just that's why LA is going in the direction that it's going in, because these are people that ascribe to, you know, a level of progressive politics that, you know, all of us sit here and our mind is blown. And how are these people being elected? It's because most people don't pay attention. They go to the endorsement section of the LA Times. They see, oh, the LA Times couldn't endorse someone who is this broken or will be this.
At the end of the day, nobody has fucking time to pay attention, man. People got to go to work. People got shit to do, man. Come on, let's keep it a buck.
Harmful, and they assume it's somebody that's, you know, sufficient. That's who they vote for, and the LA Times keeps on winning. And part of it, and the people who are winning as a function of that, are somewhat forwarded by Nika Sooncheong.
Right. So let's give some background here. First off, with Nika. So she does consider herself an activist, has a master's in African Studies and a BA.
Dog, at the end of the day, you cannot be a fucking billionaire activist. There's no such thing. What? Oh my God. This girl doesn't even get. It's a privilege for her to comfortably be a activist going to sleep in a mansion every night. I mean, God damn, this shit is crazy. But at the end of the day, hey, hopefully she's using her resources to help people out and not necessarily just kind of virtue signal her audience to saying, hey, quote unquote, I'm marketing myself as these are my beliefs, which a lot of political pundits do. That's on CNN and Fox News. They don't necessarily believe in what they believe in. They just talk it so they can make the money. A perfect example of that is Bill O'Reilly. It's all about that paper, man. How many shows that guy used to have? Come on, man.
International relations from Stanford. Despite a 137% rise in crime in West Hollywood, she was involved with defunding the sheriff's department.
And she was on the safety commission.
Yeah.
She should be serving lattes at a Pete's Coffee, but she's on the safety commission.
So and now and so even more background. So the reason that we're talking about the LA Times so much is because they just laid off a little over 20% of their newsroom, about 115 people being reported. They're saying it's because there's been about a $30 to $40 million loss in profits or in earnings, and a lot of it's because of people are going to social media now, so they got rid of their whole video department. They got rid of a lot of it. They're trimming the fat, the meat, and just really leaning out their staff.
And the LA Times, let's not cap about this. Before Elon Musk purchased Twitter, they were relying on certain algorithms to go their way. And as soon as he took over, he changed it. He definitely has changed. I see Mark Cuban actually give inside scoop of that. He knows for a fact that they changed the algorithm. So certain people and certain institutional publications don't get promoted like they used to. And a perfect example of this is Vice Media with YouTube. As soon as YouTube got their creators and their consumers to actually mess with the long form content, they no longer posted Vice Media videos in the very front of YouTube once you go to their webpage. Once that stopped, all the billion-dollar evaluations that Vice Media had, they actually had to live up to it. And when push came to shove, they really had no audience.
So I think, to put it in another sort of parlance, and I've always kind of said this, you had the old guard that was in there. Now, I was very good friends with the editor-in-chief of the Times for many, many years. Still friends with him, Shelby Coffey III. And I met him in the early mid-90s. Probably met Shelby 92. And he was the guy who ran. And he was a gray-haired white guy who was liked boxing and sports and drove a Corvette. And he and I were great friends, even though I was very low on the socioeconomic totem pole. But I was his boxing coach. And he discovered that I had some homespun wisdom, even without, he comes from D.C., I think, he runs in those circles. But he sort of was like, hey, you got some smarts, kid. And, we find ourselves having lunch and just talking about life and subjects and things like that. I remember one time telling him, because this is a long time ago, I was always pretty progressive. I was like, let's just legalize prostitution and legalize pot, like legalize drugs, like, what's the harm? And I remember he said, no, nothing's really the harm, but do you want to live in that society? And I was sort of like, yeah, I kind of get what his point is, but I don't know what his politics were, but he was a little old school and somewhat conservative, and that he was pushing back on me talking about legalizing drugs and prostitution and things like that.
Sounds like most Democrats behind closed doors. Remember, I'm from New York City, man. I got no skin in this game, but that's where I was born and grew up. I'm not conservative or Democrat, but that sounds like most Democrats behind closed doors.
And that was he was a prototype for the guys who ran newspapers from the old school. Then he moved out and the new school moved in. And I would describe it this way. If, back in the, 60s, 70s, whenever, what percentage of the employees of the LA Times would have been vegan? Okay, less than 1%. 1%, will be generous and round up to 1%. But what if the meat eaters started getting pushed out and the vegans started replacing them? And before you know it, it's 67% vegan. Now, what's on the menu for lunch? And it's bean curd. That's what's on. We're barbecue day and rib day and burger day and pizza day. Those are gone. It's vegan day now. And so I feel like with each graduating class of young, polluted-minded kids that are going to these places with their vegan agenda, then what's going to start? Okay, so then the lunchroom gets taken over by the vegans, and there's no more jerky treats in the vending machine. And before you know it, we start seeing more articles about the benefits of the vegan lifestyle in the newspaper. And if you just kind of use that as a metaphor, that's essentially what's happening times the nation.
Definitely how you describe it is reflective, but I think there's two dynamics also at play. One, people, and what I mentioned about scarcity and the switch from analog to digital. Quality goes down, so does the pay and the compensation of the reporters. Thus, the quality of the report is going down. Okay, when Shelby ran the LA Times newsroom, a job at the LA Times was difficult to get. There was a threshold to cross to get that job, and you were paid relatively well. You know, you weren't a millionaire, but you were paid pretty well. These people at the LA Times, they're glorified bloggers making $58,000, $62,000 a year, right? And a lower quality of person, a lower quality of journalist is going to take that job. So not only is it more vegans, it's more vegans who simply are less qualified and, took nutrition at Cal State Northridge instead of UCLA or USC. That's one of the things that's at play.
It's not necessarily that. It's pretty much they get boosted by the algorithm. You see, for a long time before Elon Musk purchased Twitter, and Facebook, it does the same thing to a degree. Instagram, Snapchat. If you promote certain ideologies, you do get promoted and you do get viewed in a higher light in these social media platforms. There's no doubt about it.
And I think a lot of people who are a little more surface only surface aware of these types of issues always think it's top down, that these types of things happen because there might be an editor or a family or an owner that believes these things, and that's what influences the paper. But what was on point about what you said is that it's actually bottom up, and that with more vegans in the newsroom or more people who ascribe to these politics, it doesn't matter who's running it, right? Because they're pressuring the bosses. Because the interesting thing about this recent chaos and drama with the LA Times is the senior editor resigned, and that's what set off a lot of the media blitz about what's going on there. A big Hollywood Reporter article, and a guy named Kevin Merida, who was only 3 years in the job at the Los Angeles Times. Patrick Soon-Shiong apparently recruited this guy heavily to run the LA Times. I don't recall what his prior job was, but he's very well regarded in the journalism world. Apparently he was recruited. Here's $1 million a year and come live in Patrick Soon-Shiong's $75 million house guest room. And that's how he convinced Kevin Merida to take this job. Merida was pushing back against Nika and the more progressive, younger cohort at the LA Times, and finally about a week ago he couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah, so I think about, and maybe in this particular case there's so much independent wealth that it really can be a lost leader for these guys. But I always sort of generally subscribe to the argument that everything's sort of economically sort of shaped or pushed or something. And so more metaphors, but if I got myself an In-N-Out burger franchise, not in Oakland, because they had to move. By the way, that's the
or else you get fucking robbed over there at that In-N-Out burger. Better not play.
Only In-N-Out franchise ever in 75 years to shutter their doors and windows.
Sad.
One. Okay, Oakland.
That'd be the one. That'd be the one.
Okay, but let's defund that police. So Bud Light, it happened kind of overnight, but there are many examples of many publications that are starting a long, slow decline and slide in revenue and readership and stuff. How come there's no point where somebody pumps the brakes and goes, we're not in the hummus business, people.
Because the algorithms on those social media platforms promote that ideology, even if it doesn't make money. That's the problem. The perception of what the audience wants, it's one way on social media, but in real life, when you have to monetize some of those articles and some of those concepts, they don't work. All it is just basically virtual signaling certain trendy topics or just trendy things to do or say on social media. But that doesn't necessarily translate to clicks. You're going to get retweets or just reposts, etc. But no one's actually clicking and reading these articles full through, or even watching videos or whatever short form content they're posting out.
And Adam, you and I talked about this the last time because you asked me, what's the business model of this? And I said, how's the business model working? And I said, the business model is the owner's so rich it doesn't matter.
Right.
And so the tagline, go woke, go broke. Okay, fair enough. That does end up eventually being true a lot of the time, but it
really should be go woke, look at your analytics. Matter of fact, you put anything out there, you should be looking at your analytics. And very unfortunate, but a lot of companies are not necessarily doing that. They're kind of riding the coattails of just being on the right side, or just knowing someone in the back end at Instagram, or knowing someone in the back end on Twitter, etc. And they're hoping that their posts will get a certain boost. But none of this is translating to real money.
matters the timeline. It matters how long can you be woke until you go broke, right? And that shows you that while economic incentives and economic factors do eventually win out, cultural factors are very powerful. And what's happening with SI, when the managing editor of the swimsuit edition, and she's got 85,000 Instagram followers, and she goes and puts a tranny on and a overweight woman on the cover of the Sports Illustrated issue, and her comments on Instagram are all these, Goop membership subscribers talking about how amazing it is that she's being so inclusive with the swimsuit edition.
Exactly, and those people are not customers of the magazine. The actual customers and guys who buy those magazines are not going to spend that money. That's not what they want. Once again, the virtue signaling online is a powerful fucking tool. Man, social media overall, man, it's fucking powerful as hell, man. Got these fucking fake-ass Fortune 500 companies about to go broke.
She's going to sit there and think that she's right, even if the numbers are going down, right? So there's resistance to the economic incentives because there's such a powerful cultural incentive recently, and that is what happened with the LA Times. But like you said, your philosophy eventually wins out because apparently the Soon-Shiong, the mother of the Soon-Shiong family, Michelle Soon-Shiong, she was the one most bothered by their losses. Apparently, the inside baseball was that at a board meeting sometime in the last year, she lost it and was lamenting, "We're writing $1 million check a week to keep this business in operation. We can't do this any longer." And that, Patrick Soon-Shiong is probably sitting there saying, okay, well, I'll lose $300-400 million. I'll still be there with about $6-7 billion. Nika Soon-Shiong certainly doesn't care. She'd rather have this as her woke platform and amplification of her worldview. But Michelle, luckily for us, Michelle Soon-Shiong likes to, embrace reality a little bit more. And she eventually had it and said, we can't keep on losing $50 million a year.
Seems like her mama is right. He knows at the end of the day, the dad is not going to say no to the daughter. He has more than enough money to keep it afloat for a while until she kind of gets out of that phase of just, kind of being this woke progressive, not realizing that she's actually lamenting and just basking in her privilege every day. So for those of you living in major cities, as I come from New York City, and I'm pretty sure you guys are experiencing the same thing, it's not necessarily just about a bunch of pension funds just around every major city in America building condos or luxury condos or just apartments in general, hoping that there's going to be enough people to rent these things out for inflated prices. And I knew it was a matter of time where the same algorithms we see on social media were eventually going to make their way into the real estate market. And once again, a person who grew up in Brooklyn, especially the last neighborhood I lived in Crown Heights and in Bushwick, I would say they're always building brand new apartments, but at times once they get finished, they don't get rented out for months. And then one day, the whole thing is just rented out in less than 2 weeks. And there was one place by me, they must have built like 50 apartments, a high-rise building too. And they didn't rent that out for a whole year. And then all of a sudden I looked up, less than 2 weeks, they had the whole thing rented out. And come to find out, there's a couple of companies out there, I believe headquartered in Texas, and they're actually putting all of these apartments in collaboration with many different property owners to actually set the market value of what prices to put on the apartments, when to hold back on certain inventory to make it available to the public, and when to release it. And for years, this has been going on in Manhattan, in New York City first, because a lot of those apartments are vacant. But it's slowly made its way down to Brooklyn, especially downtown Brooklyn. A lot of those apartments are empty. There's buildings where I spoke to security guards and they'll tell me most of the building is empty. But a lot of these pension funds, they're sitting on a lot of cash, and they could hold those L's for a little bit. They could take those losses, and eventually they slowly start to release those apartments in the market. And it's one of the factors that are contributing to the high cost of living in a lot of major cities throughout the country. But of course, when it's eventually too late for the public to be aware of this, the media outlets are starting to finally report it, even though they already knew some of this was happening. You guys check it out. Every once in a while, I'll check in.
Tonight, the Arizona Attorney General is calling it a massive scheme landlords are using to raise rent, and it has impacted hundreds of thousands of people in the valley. Today, Chris Mays announced a new lawsuit going after several major property management companies who she claims work together to artificially increase rent prices.
It may be one of the reasons why Arizona is in a housing crisis. Attorney General Chris Mays says this alleged scheme has been going on since 2016.
Money is tight right now for Mila Bazin.
Inflation is just too high for us right now, and it's going way up.
What's also going up for her? Rent.
We moved in 2021, and it was $1,400, and now it's up to $1,785.
Thinking it's just the way it is. But Attorney General Chris Mays claims it may be part of an insidious scheme happening to hundreds of thousands of renters in the valley.
They tricked tenants into paying more for rent than they otherwise would have.
She filed a lawsuit against 9 prominent apartment landlords, including the one that owns Bazin's, and a software company called RealPage Incorporated. They control about 70% of apartments in the Phoenix metro.
You cannot throw a rock in Phoenix without hitting a building that was jacking up rents.
This is how the alleged scheme works. These apartment companies, who are supposed to be competitors, were colluding by giving RealPage their leasing information. RealPage would then put that into an algorithm that told these companies what they should charge, typically 15% or more than other complexes, deceiving tenants into thinking they were getting a fair deal when really, it created a monopoly.
This was not a fair market at work. It was a fixed market that harmed renters while driving up the profit margins for this housing cartel.
Mays says it caused renters to pay millions of dollars more in rent.
With the way the world is going, I'm not shocked at all.
Bazin is now...
Imagine how many corporations have now invested into this scheme. Man, there's a lot of companies that provide this algorithm. I'll read off the list in a second.
Considering leaving at the end of her lease.
We're pretty scared to stay here. We don't know if they're going to up it.
But knowing just how many could be part of this, she doesn't know where to go.
Mays says she is seeking restitution in this lawsuit. Meanwhile, we did hear back from one of the companies that denied any involvement in this alleged scheme.
Now here's some of the companies that are providing these algorithms. RealPage, AMC, Avenue 5, BH, Camden, HSL, RPM, and Woodler. My God. But you see, living in New York, especially through the pandemic in 2020, I knew something was up. You know when you always had that feeling? I knew something was up, and I used to listen to Bloomberg every morning just to hear them advertise to their institutional investors, hey, you could buy real estate in Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and then get a huge rate on return on some of these rents. Like, they're advertising these to major investors that have, you know, holding money for pension funds, etc. And all this gentrification, or just, I don't want to really say necessarily gentrification, but just all of these new projects, these luxury rentals, they're all funded by the local fire department union, the teachers union. It's everyday citizens that are funding their own overpricing in their own neighborhood. But let's check out more information on RealPage. I believe that's the main algorithm company that a lot of these high rises in New York City use.
RealPage products are used to set prices on roughly 4.5 million housing units in the United States. That includes the units in this complex, some of which had rents starting at just under $3,000 a month in January 2024.
We've been told as tenants by employees of Equity that the software takes empathy out of the equation so they can charge whatever the software tells them to charge.
That sounds like most of tech. There is no empathy. For all you artists that are doing music and you think Spotify and Instagram and all these platforms are helping you out, they got no empathy for none of you guys. Everything is math based. I mean, just if you know anyone in tech, the way they think, there's nothing artistic about anyone that does engineering, tech, or any field similar to those things. There's none at all. So the fact that they're creating all these creator-based platforms, it's a conundrum in itself, but we'll get to that eventually later.
Property managers started to price apartments with RealPage products in the mid-2000s.
It's pretty much unequivocal. Just turning the system on and letting it perform will outperform your manual analyst. There's almost no way it can't.
Jeffrey Roper is the inventor of YieldStar. The product was acquired by RealPage in 2002. Its model was combined with another software, Lease Rent Options, and reintroduced in a new AI tool dubbed AI-RM for for short.
So you're going to find large REITs and portfolios out there. Absolutely, it's everywhere. I can tell you from the design of YieldStar, it is not directly looking at what the guy across the street is doing in order to determine my rents. He has pieces falling into vacancy points in time that I do not have.
The company says its software can increase a landlord's revenues by 2 to 7%. RealPage told CNBC that it charges landlords a fixed fee for each unit that it helps manage, regardless of its rent price. What happens with the proceeds is up to private equity giant Thoma Bravo, which acquired RealPage for $10.2 billion in 2021. In court filings, Thoma Bravo claimed that it's not liable for the acts of its subsidiary. The Attorney General in D.C. says local landlords complied with RealPage's recommended prices over 90% of the time. Tenants across the United States have launched numerous lawsuits against their landlords for using RealPage. At least 34 landlords were involved in litigation. In 2023, the Justice Department filed a statement of interest in the class action, arguing that the complaints adequately allege violations of the Sherman Antitrust Act.
But this is the era that we're in currently right now. The laws are not going to be able to keep up with the tech. The fact that some of these property owners have been doing this since 2005, it shows you that the laws are just way behind. It took COVID, it took inflation, it took the Airbnb kind of causing issues in a lot of major cities as far as the rental market to kind of force governments to take a look at what's going on. And you add on top of that all the homelessness that's going on. Look at all the factors that had to happen for governments to even consider taking a look at this. It leaves you to wonder, just the laws right now are just not really set up to catch up. They're almost 10 to 15 years behind on this. The tech is definitely affecting a lot of things. It's almost like the metaverse is actually hitting the universe. And taking a look at the sports landscape, Pat McAfee and ESPN, things are getting quite interesting over there because ESPN now is going to a more personality-driven business. They're not necessarily entity-driven anymore. As with social media and just the online personalities, guys like Pat McAfee, Stephen A. Smith, Shannon Sharp, they could actually take their shows on the road outside of that network. They don't necessarily have to be there anymore. And it's causing quite a few rifts within that transition. As Pat McAfee, I keep calling him Pat McAfee, but Pat McAfee, he's doing some really dope shit though. I can't lie. The fact that he built his business on his own and he's showing in real time right now how much ESPN really needs him by calling out one of their top executives live on the air. This is how much their business has changed. And their executive, I believe his name is Norby Williams. He's actually trying to sabotage and release false information on the ratings of his show, which does not even include the digital performance of his show. And this has been a culture throughout ESPN in the many years of them trying to sabotage certain shows to not be successful.
More people are watching the show than ever before. We're very thankful for the ESPN folks being very hospitable. Now, there are some people actively trying to sabotage us from within ESPN. Funny. More specifically, I believe Norby Williamson is the guy who is attempting to sabotage our program. I'm not 100% sure. That is just seemingly the only human that has information, and then somehow that information gets leaked and it's wrong, and then it sets a narrative of what our show is, and then are we just going to combat that from a rat every single time? I don't know. But like somebody tried to get ahead of our actual ratings release with wrong numbers 12 hours beforehand. That's a sabotage attempt. And it's been happening basically this entire season from some people who didn't necessarily love the old edition of the Pat McAfee show to the ESPN family. Sure. There's a lot of those. We've heard them anonymously quoted in the Washington Post, in the New York Post, in the New York Times, in the LA Times, in Wall Street Journal. And they're never like.
And if you notice him naming all this, and it's so interesting watching this with white guys, all those publications tend to be coastal, tend to be left-leaning. When they see a white guy with a country accent from the middle of the country with a tank top on, it always seems to be a pushback with that. Very interesting culturally to see this type of clash. This is really rare to see. And it's really never projected in the media, the uncomfortability that I would say coastal Caucasians have with middle America Caucasians. It's very, very quite interesting. And I believe this has played out before when Vince McMahon and his wrestling company tried to merge with NBC. And that same clash kind of came about. It's a very similar clash that's going on with Pat McAfee down in Connecticut and Bristol. Very interesting.
Like, yeah, love the show. This is awesome. It's always like little things to try to tear us down. So even with the enemy within our own camp, somebody that I don't like that guy. That guy left me in his office for 45 minutes, no-showed me in 2018. So this guy has had zero respect for me. And in return, same thing back to him for a long time. So even with that taking place and potential PR, like we're still growing somehow. Yep. So we're very thankful. Yeah. I think we're doing it right. We're trying to do it as right as possible. We have good intentions every single time we come in here. We don't always get it right, but motherfuckers been getting it wrong for a long time in this specific field. Long time.
Man, he has a lot of power down at ESPN. Live on air, he gets to curse. He gets to wear tank tops. Shout out to Pat McAfee. ESPN definitely need a shakeup like that. They really need him more than he needs them. And again, there's an uncomfortability with Pat McAfee being there at ESPN, and you even see it play out with guys who no longer work for the network, as Bill Simmons even got into the mix throwing light jabs. Once again, there's an uncomfortability with coastal Caucasians, with the Caucasian from Middle America. And this is one of the few instances we see this play out in real time.
So this is a quick one, but have you noticed how with sports ratings, everybody's sports ratings are up on TV? Like we just had the Super Bowl came out. It was the most watched Super Bowl ever. 123 million. It's like, man, that seems weird because I thought people under 25 were on TikTok and on YouTube and on Snapchat and on all the streaming services. You have so many more TV choices. Why would the ratings go up? And then you see like ESPN, they do at the end of the year or the end of the month, be like highest ratings ever for Get Up and all these different shows. Same for Fox. All their shows are up. Everybody's ratings are basically up except for the NBA and whoever replaced the 12 p.m. Sports Center. Well, McAfee's created a new version of how to do this.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
Why uh-oh?
I don't know.
We're not allowed to talk about Pat McAfee?
Let's do it. I don't know.
He starts the show and it'd be like, Cowboys, bro. I don't know, man. I don't know. What's going on?
There goes that passive aggressive coastal Caucasian. This is Bill Simmons. This is Boston Bill Simmons. This is Northern Cali Bill Simmons.
What's going on there, bro? And then it cuts to his three people.
Right.
And then they'll be like, well, I don't know. And then they'll go back to him. It's like, it's not good, bro. Not good. Not keep an eye on that, bro.
Yeah. Two of them are looking to take their first cigarette break. And then McAfee's just going on.
We don't have a rundown, bro. No rundown on the show, bro.
Dukes of Hazzard live.
I don't know, bro. I don't know. It's Mike McCarthy. It's not looking good for him, bro. It's not looking good. Not looking good for that guy, bro.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I would be really hard to do this podcast with 7 people staring.
Right.
But then you have to, how do you include the 7 people?
It is tough. Yeah. It is tough.
And be like, oh, I didn't get to Bobby yet.
Right. I felt a little better about bouncing stuff off of Harry after watching some of that show this week.
Jordan Love, I don't know, bro. That guy's good. He's just good, bro. He's just good.
Uh-huh.
He's good, bro.
Yep.
He's good. The guy can sling it. He's good.
So Bill Simmons comments him about having all those microphones. But unfortunate for Bill, he's actually going through a cultural shift over there at the Ringer. You see, the business model he had with employing all those podcasters and having so many different shows, it costs a lot of money to run his network like that. And the way Spotify had read up with Joe Rogan, the guy who has the most successful and most profitable podcast, they're probably more than likely not going to re-up with Bill Simmons because his overhead must be crazy. I mean, he has people at the Ringer thinking about forming a union, and some of his most talented writers or just content creators have already left the company. So Spotify is actually removing themselves from getting into the business of investing into podcasting, as they're not really seeing a rate of return. And also they don't mind partnering up with people like Joe Rogan to actually share a piece of the revenue that he actually makes. So more than likely, The Ringer is probably looking at its last few years, and it wouldn't shock me if Bill Simmons actually does not continue that platform outside of that Spotify deal due to all that overhead. But Pat McAfee actually responded back to a lot of his passive aggressive comments. You guys check it out, and every once in a while check in.
I think Bill Simmons, who has it all figured out. I think he had like 8,000 people riding alongside of him.
Like 8,300, I think.
That's a huge number. Yeah, it did not hit. That's really big. Really good, Bill. You still have it. I think we had 250,000 people or something like that. Yeah, keep running your mouth, Bill. Keep running your mouth. Anyways,
he's right though. Bill Simmons, for a guy who has such a large kind of platform on Spotify, his YouTube channel actually sucks. It's actually not as good. His digital footprint outside of that Spotify network, just running that website, it just really seems costly. Hire all those writers. He does a podcast that's not really even in the studio. It's just him talking. You just see his face in the camera. It just seems really low budget for a guy who got $200 million allegedly out of the Spotify deal. But we all know there's a lot of overhead that comes with the way Bill actually set up The Ringer, and it worked in the early 2010s. But in this current media landscape, again, it's going through multiple shifts. And the way Bill Simmons did the podcast back then does not work today. He's got to lower his overhead, and he's got to have way less shows. And I just don't think without all the shows that he has, that Ringer network, without all those shows, the one show with him only, it's not going to be lucrative enough to strike a deal. But Pat actually spoke about what's going on with him and ESPN and some of the proxy wars and games that they're trying to play with him at the network, even though they need him badly. But just some of the old timers there, they're just refusing to kind of let the leverage that they used to have go and adapt to the new media landscape, being personality driven.
You said there is a give and take and a tug between what people hung their hats on for years and made a lot of money and what is coming and what it's going to be.
I don't know. I don't know if there was any conversations that happened behind. Obviously. So, like I thought that was a warning shot to that guy. I didn't even think that was
a direct hit.
Yeah, because I'm the executive producer of my show. I report directly to Jimmy and Bob.
Ooh, he got the direct line to those guys, boy. Ooh, keep that in mind. I don't even think Stephen A. Smith has that type of access, or he had to build up years of credibility to gain that type of access to watch Pat walk in the building and instantly get that.
So I'm not really viewing anybody as, like I saw everybody like Pat calls out his boss. I don't got a motherfucking boss. What are we, what are we, Jim Pitaro? Are we talking Jimmy Pitaro or Bob Iger? Like, is that who we're talking about? Because those are people that could technically be described as my boss. And like Burke Magnus as well, and I have a great relationship with him. But I think even Burke would say like, yeah, like we have a good like we are talking like this as opposed to like this. And
they really need Pat. He's definitely a partner. And Stephen A. Smith, you could see at first he was a little bit upset about it, but now he has to adapt to the new landscape with his show online on YouTube and various platforms, because ESPN is now getting into the business of partnering up with personalities. So they really can't offer Stephen A. Smith a large sum of money off of the show he just does on ESPN. Now that formula is completely outdated. You actually have to bring in the audience to ESPN for them to partner up with you.
So that was just a warning shot to, I thought, a person that was, at the same, which is hilarious because he's the former president of the place. I guess a lot of people had a lot of fear of him. I did not. I do not have, that guy left me sitting in his office for 45 minutes, no-showed me when I was supposed to have a meeting with him, right? When 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever.
No-showed you.
No-showed, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so
and you remember that?
What's that?
And you remember that?
This thing's a fucking elephant brain, buddy.
There you go.
Yeah. I got everybody's. Yeah. And he also banned all my friends from coming on my show.
So there was a ban of ESPN talent on my show on YouTube that came directly from him, which so much so that I started a hashtag ESPN stinks the day that everybody got banned from my show. It only trended for like 8-9 hours or something like that. And then that's the next day is when I met Jimmy Pitaro. Jimmy Pitaro called me and said like, hey, how do we, what's the deal? And I told him about, you guys are banning my friends from coming on my show. Matt Hasselbeck, who worked at ESPN, Jeff Passan worked at ESPN, Dan Orlovsky worked at ESPN. All these people that I've known since before they got into ESPN, like they're not even allowed to come on my podcast or whatever, or my YouTube show. You guys banned it. So like that guy was not a fan of me or our operation for a long time. So then whenever ESPN signs us and he runs SportsCenter and our show is now in place of SportsCenter at noon, I'm a fan of SportsCenter. We all watch SportsCenter. I grew up on da-na-na, da-na-na,
All did.
but there became like a
Now he's kicking his ass out like da-na-na, da-na-na.
a war almost from behind scenes from like SportsCenter people and like people that have been at ESPN a long time against us coming in and taking their jobs and all this other shit. And I didn't see it like that. We were like pumped that we made it to the big leagues. Like, hey, I'm pumped we're on the worldwide league. Like that's how I viewed it.
Come on, man.
And this is what I'm talking about playing a checkers player. Like get the ESPN deal done. I'm like, this is awesome. Like we joined the ESPN team. So lucky to be here. We get access. And then immediately it's like, this guy sucks. This guy's ruining ESPN. And it's not coming from people outside ESPN. It was coming from people within ESPN. And I did not expect that at all. So I immediately like, okay, I'm in war. Like if that's what we're doing, we're in war. And then once you start learning about how shit's going behind scenes, things that are being said to people, things that are being leaked, the timing in which they're being leaked, it's like, oh, they're trying to kill me. Like they're trying to make our show impossible to advertise with. They're trying to make sure people don't watch our show. So like, as I started learning that, I'm like, all right, well, that's not going to, I don't know how this has gone in the past with other people.
It ain't going here.
But yeah, this particular white trash kid from Pittsburgh, like, hey, Suits, this is not how this is going to go. So that was just a warning shot. That wasn't even like supposed to be, and then obviously it goes big. And I heard from, this is no lie, no less than like 40 people that have worked at ESPN or used to work at ESPN. And they were like, thank you for saying what you said. And I was like, well, if I really crafted a statement about that, I mean, I could have said something much better, but I also did not appreciate the thing I didn't think about, once again, checkers player, I did not expect the backlash afterwards. Like Burke Magnus just became the president of content at ESPN. I think he has a great vision for what the future of sports media should look like. He was a big part of us joining ESPN. People were attacking Burke because it made him look sloppy because it's inside the building. People were attacking Jimmy because it looked sloppy. And that was something that I did not think about. I was very apologetic about. Like, I didn't mean to take down my allies or make allies look bad in the whole thing, but I genuinely did not expect it to get as big as it did because I didn't think I said anything that was like that crazy.
No,
you know
kept
what I
it
mean?
real.
Or like I'm a pretty good talker, I'm a pretty good promo cutter. Like if I really wanted to saw a motherfucker down, like I thought I could have done it in a much bigger way.
He definitely could, but he's just adapting to the corporate environment. And I would say ESPN has to adapt themselves to Pat's type of environment if they want to remain as a player in this space. Because getting into the personality space, you have to be less robotic. And ESPN is going to have to loosen up some of those fucking box suit ties that they have their anchors wearing when talking about sports for God knows what reason. To wear a suit and tie to talk about sports on TV is kind of crazy when you think about it. And it's kind of antiquated and outdated. So one of the ESPN colleagues that thanked Pat for stepping up to Norby Williamson is Dan Lebitard. He spoke on some of his experiences with Norby. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, check in.
So, to have had access at that time to the most powerful man in sports, who was an ally of mine who wanted me to start little fires, but he's not out, to the Disney power machine after George Floyd, to have, like, to be in there and be like, wait a minute, can I get to Iger and Disney on, like, real change stuff? To now watch cowboy hats make a Mets with Aaron Rodgers that gets to Iger and Disney and gets to the top of the power chain because he's got the power to not need ESPN anymore because these brands have, like, ESPN needs this now. They have to, so they make all sorts of precedents for him. He can curse on television and everything else. And again, I need to make this clear, like, more power to him, because Pat McAfee, you have done an amazing job of realizing before anybody else did that this was a space that the people who were actually dominating this space weren't as good at competition as you are, because a punter got into the space and figured it all out. I can knock these journalists out of the way. So may he have all of the fun and chaos and anarchy that is shaking that machine from the inside, because to me it's comedy to watch it, but the portions of it that hurt are like, man, I was so close with whatever our show was, which was sort of like that, to getting into the real corridors of power where I could have maybe influenced made a change in how bullshit corporate the statements were after George Floyd. How like, because you've seen the machine, whatever was happening that moment after the pandemic.
Oh, right here, he's about to explain how ESPN shifted from woke to not woke and how fake it looks overall. Just this whole corporate shield of just being politically correct, how fake it even makes you look.
That year after George Floyd, to see the machine that was saying to us, well, at every turn, no, we're the Black Lives Matter now, to see it now shift and everything go back to the way that it was, it has been a little jarring, given that at that moment, I remember it, we were in it, it lasted for a while, it felt empowering, it felt strong, it felt like, oh, okay, maybe people will be heard. To see the machine go right back to where it was, how do I say any of that and walk you guys down that path without sounding like I'm bitter at ESPN or bitter at McAfee? Like, I want to walk that path honestly, but that's how it happened from my viewpoint. So to see him call out by name an executive, when I had to go, and when I said what I said, I had to go meet with Pitaro in New York, and there were headlines, and then stuff gets leaked about what my salary is, and all the stuff that he's complaining about started happening to us at the end. I enjoyed seeing him call it out. I was surprised to see that there were no consequences for the person that he called out or for him, but it's a new age over there. They have to make the compromises because I think they need him more than he needs them.
I said that the other day.
And that is Facto Mundo. Definitely the media entities like ESPN, which were almost Teflon back in the broadcasting cable space, where a lot of consumers were forced to tack on maybe an extra $10 to $15 on their cable bill, are now faced with choices where they don't have to necessarily sign up for that program. So they're losing out on their subscription service. And now, due to the technology, their employees are now empowered to venture out on their own and build their own entities and actually become a competitor, or even having the optionality of partnering up. So a lot of major cultural shifts, not only financially, so a lot of major cultural shifts been going on over there down in Bristol, Connecticut. So finally, the WrestleMania of all rap beefs have finally happened. And there's a lot of different things here at play with this Kendrick and Drake beef, not only on the political side, the cultural side, and mainly the tech side. A lot of different fronts are happening in this whole clusterfuck of just multiple clashes. And Kendrick is actually testing Drake in a way he never really had to confront, which is things that are outside of the materialism, the sales, the braggadocious way that rappers normally are like, just who he is as a man, and culturally doesn't even know what he's supposed to be standing on. But even through all the beef, anytime you see Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls, it's not really a beef between both of them. It's really Death Row Records or Interscope versus Bad Boy, or whatever conglomerate was supporting Bad Boy at the time, if it was Columbia Records, Atlantic, etc. That's really the war right there. I know on the Tupac side, they had Jimmy Iovine, and on the Biggie side, whoever represented the label that P. Diddy was working for or just partnering up with. Those are the real clashes right there. So it's an East Coast versus West Coast battle among the record sales. It's not necessarily between the two personalities. And with Kendrick and Drake, it seems like the same thing is playing out here, but there is a cultural clash here. Because Universal Records, there's a number of things that they're trying to make happen. They're actually battling AI with TikTok, while at the same time, they have plans on using AI to condition the consumer to be comfortable listening to that type of music so they can cut out the middleman with the artist. And Drake overall, what he represents to Universal Music Group, he is the ultimate algorithm. He is the music industry right now. It is him. He's actually built into the system, very similar to Russell Simmons, Jay-Z, Dr. Dre. If you look at most of the rap moguls, they were all born around the same year. And Drake is one of the few stars that actually came up with the streaming era, with that era just coming up, Apple Music giving him that deal, him actually being built into that Spotify algorithm. He is the ultimate algorithm. And it's very inorganic for hip hop to have anyone in the #1 spot as long as Drake has been there. That's how you could tell most of his stuff is very inorganic. And a lot of people in the culture seem like they're sick of it. They're sick of it. The guy makes good music, but there's something not authentic at this point. The longer he stays at that #1 spot, the more it's going to be revealed how inorganic it is. And the consumers will start to see it. It's not going to take a rap beef to expose it. It's very inorganic in the culture of hip hop to have a #1 guy occupy the top spot for 10 to 15 years. It's just not possible. It's not part of the culture. That's like saying you have an NBA champion for 15 years in a row. You know something is up. Like, really? There was no injuries? There was nothing? Like, this guy just was perfect for 15 years? It's the same thing in hip hop. There's newer generations that come in, they bring in new sounds, new waves. It's very inorganic for someone to occupy that top spot for all those years. And Drake has basically become the institution. He's got Nike behind him. He's got Universal Records behind him. And just with the algorithm play, using Tupac and Snoop Dogg's voice, he's actually introducing Universal Music's plan, or just the music industry's plan on using AI. And again, there's a lot of cultural, a lot of inner battles going on within this beef. First of all, Kendrick, the tracks he dropped, a few of them were not monetized. So it'll actually allow content creators to actually use the song and fully monetize their videos. While at the same time, if you check out the way Kendrick put his tracks on Spotify, he was actually referenced as the only writer. Meanwhile, Drake, of course, whatever he puts out has to be monetized. There was a couple other people that were credited in the songwriting on some of his disses. We've never really seen this type of shit before. But again, that motherfucker Drake is built into that algorithm, boy. I mean, very unfortunate for Lil Wayne. He was a couple years off from his prime years of being built into the same algorithm. But Drake came up at a good time. He actually probably notified Lil Wayne that the money was fucked up with Birdman or just Universal, whoever. And Drake was probably trying to correct his situation, and the timing just came out perfect for him to be built in, just streaming in general, dropping all those albums, being exclusive to Apple even at a point. But there's a lot of multi-cultural wars going on in this. And it seems like just Drake being that ultimate algorithm right now, he just swallows up whoever comes out. And it's a very inorganic thing for hip hop to have new artists come up and the #1 guy sort of swallows up their wave and you just never hear from them again. It's inorganic to the culture itself and its whole history to have someone sit at the #1 spot for that long. I mean, I believe Drake is almost approaching 15 years on it. And also the modern celebrity, in a way, culturally, is being exposed because leaving yourself too open on social media, you know, with the pics, the memes, you know how Drake likes to kind of overexpose himself on social media, and it seems like it's actually backfiring on him on this rap beef. And you also have a lot of publications who don't fucking cover hip hop that are making up all kinds of rules that Kendrick is going overboard. Once again, Drake is plugged into the machine. Billboard, you know, all these major media conglomerates like Complex, they're all part of the system. And when you see articles come out saying Kendrick went too far, why is Kendrick questioning his racial lines or his cultural way he was brought up? It's just a lot of different moving parts going on right here. But again, TMZ commenting on some of these things, this is an entity that does not understand hip hop culture, and we got to be aware that there are publications that are trying to make up rules for rap beef, even though Drake had mentioned Kendrick's wife. So he brought this beef onto a whole nother level, and there are no rules in these beefs. Death will be the final destination if it has to. It's in the history books. So once again, it's interesting with the publications that just really cover hip hop because it's popular, but they have no understanding of the culture. And TMZ is definitely one of them. I don't know how the fuck Van Lathan used to work for them. That platform right there, they just hop on any wave. But mainly, the biggest thing in this rap beef is the AI that was rolled out. And right now, Spotify is in a proxy war with the record labels and also the distribution companies as far as kind of trying to eliminate the market share of independent artists on that platform. That's why they elected to not pay people unless they hit a certain amount of streams. But per stream, there's still money being generated. Where does that go if they don't pay to, if you don't have 1,000 streams, maybe you have 800. Where does the money go from that? And how many independent artists have 800 streams, and then you collect it from all those artists? That got to equate to some sort of money. So the record labels are kind of playing a funny game with Spotify, having them implement all these rules, while at the same time, Spotify does have AI already in their, I would say, in their ecosystem that have no name, no author. It's hard to tell if it's even real, and it's merged into some of these playlists. So they actually have a way of keeping royalty checks to themselves. Like, this is a whole clusterfuck of a lot of different things. But once again, Drake is baked into the ecosystem. To have an AI set up like that already on deck, just all the music videos that Drake dropped that look like they cost a lot of money to do them that fast. Like, this guy is really fucking built in. But an interesting interview right here where they spoke about AI's threat to music and just the overall industry, as streaming in general right now, it's turned music into sort of a passive kind of afterthought, like the lights in your house. You don't even consider those things, they're just on. But it's not until the power goes out you really appreciate the lights. And they sort of turn music into the same thing. It's just a bunch of background noise at this point, and the playlist is just gonna curate the next thing to you. So very blindly, you could be listening to AI and not even know it. And the AI is a path to the record labels or the streaming services not to pay the artists. So there's a lot of proxy wars going on. Once again, the music industry, this is completely their fault for not understanding when they first teamed up with Apple for the iPod to list all their songs on the iTunes store, to allow Apple to actually build a $1 billion business selling iPods off the backs of their music. They sort of not only pigeonhole themselves to a price point where each song costs $1. Now you don't even have to sell a whole album, just a song. It's like the music industry continues to kind of dummy down their product to fit with the tech companies who really don't even give a fuck about the music, because they always have an ulterior motive into building their companies. But you guys check out this interview with Ted Goya as he reflected on AI's threat to music, and every once in a while I'll check in.
Well, AI is everywhere right now, and it's the hot topic in music. But the question is, how much is it being used? And the problem is there's not a lot of disclosure. What we see about AI is almost a secret. And this is probably the biggest warning sign for me, is if AI is really so wonderful, if it's so exciting, if it's so tremendous, why do they have to keep it a secret? And I see this everywhere. Now, I'm going to talk about music in a second, but let me just look at some of the other fields. Like, I'm in writing.
Yep.
And there are these AI articles everywhere, but no disclosure. A few months ago, Sports Illustrated, right before it collapsed, had this great idea of saving money by using AI to write articles. And
man, it was even worse than that. Not only did they use AI to write articles, they actually outsourced. They actually outsourced another company to get the AI or even to find the writers to write the articles. So they try to blame it on the outsourcing company, when eventually, if you go down the line and look at the paperwork, Sports Illustrated is just a name at this point. It's just a name, and the name actually gets licensed out to other companies so they can use it. It's a whole clusterfuck. Sports Illustrated is not really what we think it is. At this point, it's just a brand that's just holding kind of digital real estate at this point.
You know what they did? Is they actually assigned the names of people to the articles. Well, this article's by Bill Smith or Nancy Jones or whatever. And then they would have bios and a web page for these authors that did not exist.
And as soon as they got caught, they deleted everything. My God. But you could even tell that all these articles were written by AI. I'm wondering how they sourced these articles and got the AI to write them. How many previous writers did they kind of copyright their material? This is very interesting, but we all know the government's going to be real slow on the rollout for this AI.
Because they were ashamed
Unbelievable.
of using the AI.
Yeah.
And this is spread everywhere. In books, I had now AI books come out trying to steal my readers, and they attribute the books to Mr. Joya. Frank Joya wrote this book on jazz. And basically, they're targeting the readers of my jazz book, but deceptively. At no point do they say, this book is written by AI. So I actually looked at all the new music books that were listed on Amazon and tried to figure out which ones are by real authors and which ones are by AI. And you can't figure it out. There's no honesty there. So let's now look at music. And in music, my fear the same thing is happening. On Spotify, one of the users, a fellow named Adam Faze, was listening to Spotify, and he kept hearing the same song over and over again. He said, this is interesting. He started paying attention every time the song came on. It was a 41-second song.
Okay.
He saw it had a different name and a different artist. Now, wait a second, this song sounds almost identical to the one I heard. So he compiled a playlist of 49 songs that were more or less identical, but they had different names, different artists, and were attributed to different composers. Now, what's going on here? That can't be true. Now, it's obvious to conclude, and I can't prove it though, is this is Spotify's way of using AI. They have AI songs. They attribute them to people that don't exist, like Sports Illustrated, and this allows them to take royalties that would go to musicians and keep them for themselves. If they can own the work themselves, created by AI, they're going to be able to maximize their revenues. Now, I can't prove this is happening at Spotify, but it's hard to think of some other explanation for what's going on. So this is the real story behind AI. AI is the hot thing in music, but not because it's great music. I've never met anyone where I say, what's your favorite genre of music? Oh, I love this AI stuff. Yeah, I just can't. This AI music is my favorite genre. I've never met, maybe that person exists. I've never met them. So the AI is happening not because it's great, not because it has a fan base, not because it allows some improvements over the music that lowly.
Does that not sound like Mark Zuckerberg's Meta? When he first tried to roll that out, there was no real demand. People weren't necessarily going crazy to be on a metaverse sitting in their house with goggles on. That seems like a push by tech companies to actually gain kind of your eyeballs, kind of like same way they have your fingerprints. Now they want your eyeballs. And then now they have a better way of accessing more data from you in order to sell it and also give you advertisements within the goggles. But when it comes to that metaverse, you could tell it's a complete tech rollout. And it's the same thing with the AI music. Nobody's rushing to listen to a computerized version of a song. Songs have to have soul in them, man, to be popping. There's a human element to music that makes a song good. So robotic music does not even sound appealing. Just that whole phrase does not sound appealing at all. Only a techie would think something like that is appealing. Once again, these guys, they're very 1 + 1 = 2. There's nothing artistic about people in the tech space, in the engineering field, in the math, science / field. There's nothing artistic about these people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Their profession requires them to kind of be straightforward, look for the final answer. 1 + 1 = 2, and it'll always be that. With artists, 1 + 1 = gray area. That's how art is made. That's how That's how the brain of an artist operates. That's why you never heard of a mathematician who's become a fucking world-renowned artist. You never heard of that shit. Those two things don't even clash.
Folks like you or I would make, it's being used to save costs in a deceptive way. And that's my fear, is that what's happening with AI is it's a cost savings measure being forced duplicitously on the market for the benefit of the companies and hurting the fans and hurting the musicians.
Okay, what about TikTok and AI?
Well, this is the same question. It was very interesting. A few months ago, Universal Music pulled all their songs off of TikTok. And they complained bitterly, and they complained about royalties, but the other thing they complained about was AI. They said, well, we're not going to come back to TikTok till you get rid of AI, because we fear you're using AI to do exactly what I talked about, is you're going to move the audience to AI music so you don't have to pay Universal Music. And just a few days ago, Universal Music came back to TikTok.
That's right.
Apparently they patched up their differences, but I've seen no statement from TikTok that they're getting rid of AI. They're wedded to that. And one of the things I think you're going to see is no one will ever spell it out for you. You won't see the head of Spotify or TikTok or any of these companies say, we're going to squeeze the musicians and the labels with AI. They don't say that, but that has to be what's happening. Is people go to war against these big tech platforms. And I always predict that the tech platform will win the war. And I've been right every time. Every time I've been correct. And it's sad, you see Universal Music say, well, we're going to go to war with TikTok and force them to give in. And if Universal Music can't do it, Universal Music controls what, 35%?
32%.
32% of the recordings out there. If they can't get concessions from TikTok, who can? And around that same time.
And at the same time, the stance that TikTok took, Spotify should have taken the same stance when they first started up. I don't know why they felt the need that they should have been committed to all the old catalogs the record labels had. They could have went on and created an open platform similar to SoundCloud and actually have the artists, give them the power, the brand new artists going forward in the 2010s, the ability to maintain their catalogs, have publishing rights, and then pay them their royalties directly and not actually listing the old catalogs. You have to look at all the new artists Spotify could actually empowered in the 2010s up until now. They would have had their catalogs, but once again, that venture capital money that comes in and supports these companies when they first start out, I don't really know what's the pressures that they actually put on these guys to make a profit right away. But it's going to hurt Spotify because right now they're in a rock and a hard place as far as their business model.
Neil Young came back to Spotify. You know, he said, I'm never going to be on Spotify again. Joni Mitchell came back to Spotify. And I don't blame them, because what choice do we have?
No choice.
The platforms set the rules and the rest of us have to follow them. And this would be okay if those people really knew and loved music. But look at the people that run these platforms. They're not music lovers like you and me or your audience out there. These are people that are techies, and they have completely different goals and priorities.
As I alluded to before, and they have completely different mindset. Ted is nailing it right on the head. I have friends that are in the tech world, and the mindset is completely different. There's not an artistic bone in their body, because the tech mindset is actually developed at a very young age in school. You can't necessarily just all of a sudden become an engineer in your mid-30s or even in your mid-20s. You can't just all of a sudden start looking at math equations like that and develop that mindset. It's possible, but it's going to be very, very difficult. That's why those type of careers and those type of people are actually cultivated at a very young age in those STEM programs.
Than having a flourishing music ecosystem. They want to benefit themselves. They want to benefit their companies financially. And if the music suffers, well, they just are willing to live with it. Well, there are bots out there, and I don't want to minimize the impact. People tell me that there's money laundering going through Spotify using bots, and that this is how people, they get their dirty money. They have the bots run up plays for some track, and then the money comes back from Spotify and it's been laundered.
Facts. The whole music industry was kind of built off of the money laundering scheme. But, you know, the scammers, they got to scam, man. But the music industry, once again, it was birthed underneath that titty, man. They got to suck on that shit dry.
Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard that. I'm actually more worried about something else, in that trusting that the numbers are accurate and that people are actually listening. Places like Spotify still have games they can play. Let me give you a very amazing example, I think. The story of Johan Rohr from Sweden. A very interesting individual, Johan Rohr, because he has achieved 15 billion streams on Spotify. Now that's a large number. Let me tell you how large it is. That's more than Michael Jackson.
Right.
That is more than Elton John. It's more than ABBA. You know, it's nobody out there, with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions in the whole world, can get the kind of streams Johan Rohr is. Nobody knows his name. Now, why is that? Well, Johan Rohr never uses his own name in his music. He has 656 different aliases. Sometimes there's a man or a woman or different national groups or whatever. He never uses his own name. He uses 656 different names and then shows up on all these playlists. He is on 144 different official Spotify curated playlists, reaching 62 million people. Sometimes he's 40% or more of a single playlist, but no one knows about it because the name changes. So they're able to push all this traffic to Johan Rohr. Now, why is Spotify doing this? Now, I got an email from somebody, and I can't say if this is true. They said, Ted, you didn't hear this from me, but Spotify owns all the rights to those songs, and they're using this.
Big surprise. He's
Now,
Swedish. Spotify's from
right?
Now, for all the artists right there, that lets you know off rip that Spotify was never in the business of paying you guys anyway. That penny per stream number that they came up with, talking about CD sales, when Spotify is a tech platform and the artists today don't even know what it is to walk into a store and buy a CD. So why your streams are really measured off a CD sale, a fraction of a CD sale, shit doesn't make any sense. But at the end of the day, Spotify was never in the business of paying any artist. And the royalty rates or just the stream rates that someone like Drake or Taylor Swift or any other big name artist gets, it's a complete different number than versus what Spotify tells you is the normal stream rate for everyone else. Trust and believe, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and others could just sell their music online and they'll make millions. And it doesn't take a large percentage of their fan base to buy their CDs for them to make millions. I would say 5% of their fan base bought their CDs, they'll make millions off of that. So you got to ask yourself, how come these people don't really go direct to consumer in a real way? Especially with the advent of social media, they could just promote it there. Hey, Swifties, and with Beyonce, the Beehive, they'll all flock to their websites and buy up their CDs, merchandise, etc.
I know, it was right down the street from the Spotify headquarters. Right. Now, I can't prove that they are using Johan Rohr to avoid paying royalties to real musicians. But what other explanation can they be? And let me give you a sort of a hint of the disparity here. I started looking at his music, and the music is all just, banal background music, nothing to get excited about. And I found one of his tracks on Spotify that had gotten 4 or 5 million plays.
Okay.
Then I found the same track on YouTube. It had 100 plays.
Right.
Well, wait a second. If this is such a great song,
right, exactly.
If everybody loves this song, why does it only get 100 plays on YouTube? So what I'm worried about is there are these games that are being played. There's no disclosure. Mm-hmm. And this is not good for the music ecosystem again. Right. They're forcing this music on people, and they're only able to do it because the listening experience has become so passive. In the old days, you went and bought an album. You always knew who you were listening to because you had purchased this record with hard cash you had to reach into your pocket to get. Spotify has deliberately tried to turn the listening experience into something passive. Now, is that good for the music culture where people don't know the name of the artist? You see this all the time.
Yeah.
Something will be playing in the radio and someone will say, oh, I love that song, but they don't know the name of the artist. They don't know the name of the song. Is this good? I don't think so. And so I worry about all these ramifications that these corporations are trying to maximize their income. And God bless them. I hope they have nice corporate jets and the yachts and the whole 9 yards. But what they're doing is not good for the music culture. And that's why there's a certain sense of stagnancy now.
AKA Drake. This is why you see Drake relevant for 15 years in a row. I'm telling you, the more years that pass by and him still staying up top, dropping these mediocre albums that everyone's consensus is that it's mediocre, but yet it's pushed in front of you in the algorithm. Even if you're someone that listens to folk music, Drake will be in the top of your Spotify as soon as you open the app. Same thing for Apple Music. Shit on mine the other day, I seen Ice Spice, and I don't even listen to anything close to her kind of music. The only female artist I listen from time to time is Nicki Minaj, maybe. But for the most part, she is not my demographic. But yet, she's still pushed in front of my face.
In the music culture, it doesn't feel like there's anything vibrant happening. And that's by plan. I fear that's by plan, that the most powerful people in the world controlling music, who are the CEO of Spotify, CEO of Apple, these are the people that actually control music now. They're not musicians, they're not music lovers. They're taking steps that create the stagnancy.
Wasn't the Spotify business model flawed right from the beginning? There's a
Yes, that's what I said earlier. It was flawed from the beginning. They should have took the risk and say any new artist going forward, you can upload your music directly through here. Here's the royalty rate. We have a whole other department just to deal with artist relations. And hey, we might even set up a sub-label where we develop artists. But the back catalogs that the record labels have, the Michael Jackson, the Beatles, they don't have to upload it here. Because eventually the tech will triumph. Because eventually the audience will grow accustomed to the convenience of having the music on the app. So eventually the record labels would approach Spotify wanting to be part of their marketplace. But again, the venture capital money that supported Spotify in that initial launch was probably looking for a rate of return. And the same people that actually funded Spotify was the original record labels. Because once they went public, we found out the payouts and the large sums of money, Universal, Sony, Columbia, all the record labels had stake in Spotify. The same way they have stake in Instagram, TikTok, etc.
there's only a certain number of people that can afford to pay. When you have a subscription model like that pretty much all subscription models eventually run out of people.
Well, I ran the numbers back in 2018 when Spotify listed on the stock exchange. I got the public filing, and this is what I do. I analyze all the numbers. I'm sort of an analytical nerd, and I did all the math. And in 2018, I said, this streaming model doesn't work. There's no way they can charge $9.99 a month for all the music you want to listen to and make a profit.
Right.
They will never achieve a user base to do that. Well, it took them 18 years from inception to find out that I'm right. And so finally what you've seen in the last year is Spotify started raising prices dramatically.
Well, that's all they can do.
As did Netflix and all these places, because they realized that the model they had been working with wasn't going to deliver enough cash to pay all the stakeholders.
Yeah.
And so now we're in a situation where the whole streaming model is built on cutting costs, raising subscription prices, and then playing these little games. And I think it's very ominous that just a few days ago, Netflix announced that they are not going to tell shareholders how many subscribers they have anymore.
Cutting costs, raising the prices for the consumers. It's just everyone loses. Like, what is Spotify's product? They really don't have one. They're just a middleman and have the platform. But overall, they don't have a product. They don't have a phone that they sell that comes with Spotify already pre-installed, or just the main functionality app the same way Apple does. They don't have a powerful engine that's been collecting data for years like Facebook. They're just in a weird spot. They're just in a very, very weird spot. And judging from the Joe Rogan deal, you can tell most of his viewers did not follow him to Spotify. He gets way more YouTube hits than he does Spotify views. People don't necessarily go to Spotify to watch videos. They go to YouTube for that. It has to be taken into consideration what the audience is actually going to the platform for. They're accustomed to certain platforms for certain things. And Spotify is not that for video.
Well, this is amazing because for
It is
years they've been
amazing.
bragging about subscriber growth and we're going to get more growth and this is the whole engine of our business is adding more subscribers. The last quarterly report, they said, the subscriber stuff, we're not going to tell you about that anymore. Don't worry about it. Now, what does that mean? It means that they have given up trying to attract the audience and get the audience excited and build it. They're going to cut costs. They're going to raise prices and they're going to play all these crazy games with their algorithms and whatever. And that's sad. So it's happening in movies, this is happening in books, it's happening in journalism, and it's happening maybe most of all in music. The musicians are like the canaries in the coal mine. They're the first ones that die and topple over. And after the musicians go, everyone else should say, wait a second, that's because it's going whatever your job is now, the same kind of AI stuff is going to happen there down the line. So you should pay.
The only way it's not happening to the musicians is if they're built into that. And I believe Taylor Swift, Drake, and a few others are built into the system. They're going to have to prop up their numbers, even though if it's fake, to solidify that the platform has users.
Pay attention, even if you're not a musician or you don't depend on the music business. You should care as a fan, but even beyond that, you should care because this is the same thing that's going to happen throughout culture. Coolness no longer was some personal quality you had. It was used to market a product. Mm-hmm. And then the whole coolness in society disappeared. A chapter in my book is called America's Lost Its Cool. People are just angry at each other. Used to be, I'd get together with my bros and we tried to be as cool as possible. Now even the word hipster became a term of abuse. Coolness became suspect and sort of this culture of anger and outrage emerged. It's a 50, 60-year cycle. Curiously enough, I was reading a book by Ray Dalio, the finance expert, the super investor, and he says in finance there's a 50, 60, 70-year cycle too. And he says the reason people don't understand this, and this gets back to the point you were mentioning, is that the cycle generally takes a whole human lifetime. So
it's crazy. In rap, the cycle takes about 3 to 4 years. Sometimes 3 to 2 years, the cycle changes. That's why it's so inorganic for Drake to be the #1 guy for about 12 to 15 years. The cycle, it's been ended already for him, man.
We only live through the cycle ourselves once.
One time.
Now, if you live old enough, towards the end of your life, you start seeing a repetition of what happened when you were starting out.
Right.
Because the cycle is starting to repeat. Now,
and it's definitely starting to repeat in hip hop because Drake actually came in the industry when baggy clothes was still popular. And it was transitioning to skinny jeans. And now it's transitioning back onto baggy pants, which you see him wearing all the time. That's why I said him being the #1 guy in the genre is very inorganic. This guy's been around too long. It's inorganic to the fucking culture in itself.
What do we see happening in culture right now is we have had in commercial music a lessening in the complexity of music decade after decade after decade.
Right.
To the point now, most of the hit songs now are these 4-chord songs.
Yeah, if that.
If that. You're lucky to get those 4 chords. And a lot of people think, well, that's the way it will always be. Even you and I, at times, we get depressed. And we say, you know, where are the great maximalist songs of the past where all sorts of surprising things happened and chord changes and unexpected interval leaps? Where have they all gone?
Well, in the hip hop space, I would say Metro Boomin has actually achieved this. His songs actually don't stay consistent. They switch up, I would say, every 40 seconds. There's a major change. But very few producers do this. There's way too many producers out here using the same kind of drum kits or just, oh man, it's bad out here, man. It's bad. And it really starts with the producers. Then it goes to the rappers.
And if I asked you who are the great people at writing songs with this sort of maximalist, I'm going to surprise you aesthetic, the names we would come up with would all be dead people or people 70 or older.
Right.
So we would mention McCartney or Stevie Wonder or Joni
Bacharach.
Mitchell, Bacharach, Sondheim. And I know many people think, well, that day is gone. It'll never come back. But I believe these things come in cycles. There was a period back in the early 50s when music was getting very simple, and then with the Beatles and Bacharach and all that, started getting more complex again. And so there is a cycle, and generally this is the very interesting thing. I got this from a book called The Alchemy of Finance by George Soros, who's sort of a strange guy, but he had this theory He calls it the theory of reflexivity. And this has been very useful to me in predicting trends. What Soros says, and he's actually became a billionaire using this. He traded currencies. And this was his theory of reflexivity that made him a billionaire. And he said, the secret is the trend always goes on longer than is sensible. And it will eventually reverse, but it has to get to a ridiculous extreme before it reverses. So even when you say, well, the songs couldn't possibly get simpler, they can't possibly get simpler than they do. What Soros will say, eventually it has to push to an extreme and then it reverses because people are so tired of it.
Does this not sound like the whole Drake and Kendrick beef? The way that the culture reacted to Kendrick's songs is a symptom of them being tired of Drake. Kendrick killed it, by the way. I don't want to say his songs suck, because they definitely did not. But it's like the way people reacted to it. There's an extra energy to it. If you've been in the culture long enough, you understand. When people are feeling a way about something and they can't wait to get a certain energy out, there's a certain release that DJ Mustard's song had with Kendrick that the culture was just needing to get out. But they've been force-fed Drake for so long, they didn't even know that they even needed to get it out. That's the way it felt.
Does this happen in culture? Well, let me give you an example of where it's happening right now in the culture. Look at movies. The folks at Disney said, well, all we got to do is a Star Wars movie and a Marvel movie every 10 weeks, and we're going to get rich.
Right.
And that worked, and it worked, and it worked, and it's...
Same thing for Drake. He dropped album after album after album after views, and it kept working and working and working. This is a great analogy right here. This is Drake completely right here.
At a certain point, it just seemed ridiculous. But even at the point where it got ridiculous, they kept on doing it. And then finally, the box office receipts stopped. I've done the analysis.
That sounds like For All the Dogs too. The appraise from the audience actually stopped. That album was enough from the audience. Once they heard Drake in the same beat as Yeet and some of the other artists he had on there and the co-signs from Lil Yachty, the culture just had enough.
On this, and you see the monthly box office in the movie business is awful. There was a big burst for...
And that's no disrespect to Yachty. I love Yachty, man. Yachty is I don't want to say he's a pioneer in the culture, but he does have talent. Very talented dude, but Drake is just, that's not his demo, man. That shouldn't be his demo. But when you commercialize yourself like the way he did, or just choose that path, Drake got to accept everything with it. And eventually, you're going to be looked at as the jester, the sort of clown for the culture. Because you can only commercialize yourself up into a certain point in hip hop.
A few weeks with Barbie and Oppenheimer.
That's right.
But that's gone.
Yeah.
Now, if you go back before the pandemic, the movie business had more than $10 billion in box office receipts for more than 10 years in a row. The way it looks now, it'll never hit those numbers again. And it's because they pushed the formula to the ridiculous extreme, and then it will reverse. And I think that's going to happen in movies. I think it will happen in music. And so people always look at me and say, Ted, you're full of doom and gloom. I say, well, no, I'm actually optimistic. But I believe you've got to get to the bitter end of the cycle, and then it will reverse.
Do you think that that movies and music are on the same cycle, or does one precede the other?
I think they're on similar cycles. And so I always pay attention to movies, and I ask myself, what has happened in the past when the formula didn't work? And so I look at, for example, the 1960s. Going into the 60s, there were two formulas in Hollywood that always worked: the Western movie.
Right.
And the musical. And so they pushed these, and it was everywhere. When you and I were growing up, there were 3 TV networks, and everyone, at any night of the week you turn on, there would be a Western on one of those 3 channels. Sometimes there was a Western on 2 or 3 of them. It's just Westerns were everywhere.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah, they definitely were everywhere, because my mother wasn't even born in this country. She's from a small Caribbean island, and man, I was shocked. She knew who Clint Eastwood was at a young age before she even came to America. Like, that's crazy. Clint Eastwood? Are you serious?
And they pushed it to a ridiculous extreme, to a point where even the most devoted fans of cowboy.
Even Clint Eastwood stopped making them.
No, even Clint. No, that's right. Even Clint Eastwood stopped making the westerns, and the musical died out too. You had like The Sound of Music, and then after that, it was almost impossible to have a hit musical movie.
Right. Yeah.
So what happened in the movie industry then? I think it's very interesting. The studios were desperate, and they said, well, we've got to take chances now, which we hate to do. We here in Hollywood, the thing we hate to do is take chances, but we have no other alternative. So as the Western died, the musical died, the formulas died, they started doing these edgier films, these grittier films, these risk-taking films. So you have things like The Godfather and Chinatown and Taxi Driver, and some people will tell you these were the best movies of all time, but the fact is they were edgier, they were grittier, and they were full of risk-taking because Hollywood had no other option.
Well, if you look at The Godfather, they tried to get Coppola kicked off the movie many times.
The studio hated it.
They hated it.
Pacino, they
hated
Coppola a million
Pacino.
times that nothing worked on this movie.
That's right.
If you're going to do a crime movie, you got to have shoot-ups every 5 minutes. But Coppola understood you needed to do something different at that stage in cinema history.
Yeah.
I believe we're at exactly that same point now. What's the one thing Hollywood would hate to do right now is anything edgy.
That's right.
Don't do anything edgy. But that's what the audience is hungry for. So Hollywood is now in a point where they're going to have to take risks and do things that are a little bit different, more ambitious. I think music's the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I think music is the same way because
And the culture right now is definitely the same way. We're kind of sick of the same rollout of Drake not really saying anything in these songs. Publications telling us that he went #1 again. But yet most of us really didn't even listen to the album. And for any new acts that come after him, I pray to God that they do not collaborate with this guy. Because at this point, he's really Agent Smith from The Matrix. Once he puts his hand in you, he converts you to him. And you just stay stuck in the algorithm forever underneath him.
That same period where you had this risk-taking in movies, you had it in popular music too. You know, the Beatles broke all the rules. So there was a period of like 5, 6, 7 years, you could do anything.
Yeah.
You could do anything if you were a rock or pop act, and the record labels understood we've got to give these people some freedom. And it drove them nuts to give people like Brian Wilson freedom because he would do crazy things. But that worked once, and I know people don't believe it's possible. I hear people say, Ted, these record labels will never give people creative freedom the way they did in the past. And I said, they will not have a choice.
And one industry you see not having a choice is the sports media industry. The fact that ESPN now is more personality driven, they have to get the Pat McAfees, they have to get Stephen A. Smith, or just any personality on there that can actually bring in an audience, because that's where the business is headed. The Shannon Sharps. I mean, we've never actually thought ESPN would ever let someone work for the network almost on a part-time basis. And guys like Shannon actually spend more time working on his own network with Colin Cowherd, who works for a rival company in Fox Sports.
They will not have a choice because the formula eventually dies.
When the music industry started to collapse after Napster happened, 1999, and then profits started to decrease after the year 2000, dramatically every year.
Absolutely. 1999 was the peak year for the music industry.
So then the labels started saying, okay, we need to hire producers that can write songs. Okay, we need to hire, we're gonna have less money, so we have to hire producers that can also mix the songs. Then it became...
See, it seems like they try to cut costs within the industry instead of looking outwards and say, hey, why don't we develop our own tech space where we can host the music, host the videos, create a kind of curate an environment where listeners can come and collaborate and appreciate the music or create music of their own. They never thought like that because they're not really in the business of doing these type of things or just elevating the music culture. That's not the business that they're in. The year that he mentioned, 1999, I believe I looked that up. That's the year Napster came about. It kind of shook the music industry and dropped the blueprint of the songs being online and being shared. It seems like the music industry has never recovered after that.
These people, the Max Martins, would spring up that actually could write the hit songs for the artists. they could build the tracks, things like that, and they would have these superstar producers. It was the era of that. Now we're in the era where there are 7 writers on every song and 8 producers. Nobody can write their own song anymore. Where there is no Joni Mitchell, there's no Stevie Wonder, there's no people that can literally write a song themselves, or at least no one that's trusted by the record label. It used to be that they had to have their, if a record failed, well, listen, I hired this producer, I hired this mixer, and they're people that have had many hits, so I'm safe with my job. Nobody wanted to take a chance, to your point. Now we're at this point where everything is done by committee,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So it has to revert to something else, I think. I agree with you on that.
And someone once told me, they said, there's never been a great work of art created by committee.
Right.
And there are no literary masterpieces. Probably the only exception is the King James version of the Bible, where King James had a committee put that together, and it started to happen. It was probably divine intervention, is my theory on that made sure that got through. But for the most part, when you get the committee, things start falling apart. Now, the rule of thumb I have is I look at the song and I count how many chord changes there are. Then I count how many songwriters. And if there are more songwriters than there are chord changes, that's like a warning sign. That's a red, if there are only 4 chords in the song and there are 8 composers, you know, something's going wrong there. But what's really going on there? And to me, this is part of a larger problem. First of all, what's going on is economic, in that being named one of the songwriters is to get you a share of the composing and publishing royalties.
And most of your record executives, they're listed underneath as songwriters. That's how they get their publishing. I'm pretty sure P. Diddy, on a number of songs he never wrote, as we all know, he's not really a songwriter. I'm pretty sure under the publishing checks, he's listed as a songwriter in a lot of music. This is how guys are able to get paid. But the artists don't really have the privilege to put his name sometimes in that paperwork, or they may only cut him maybe a 5% slice and give a bunch of other people who are never in the room percentages of the song. That's pretty much how the music industry works. Overall, it's always been a toxic environment. The fact that everyone gathers in a room and just creates a product and no one wants to talk business, it's already a questionable industry. They kind of made it not a norm to talk about business. Like, imagine walking in the studio and say, hey guys, what's going to be the splits, before you even do anything. They made that person right there the awkward guy. Yo, don't ask that. Get the fuck out of the studio.
So this is almost like the stock options you give somebody. You're hiring a team to run a tech company and you want to get this person involved, and you give them a little taste of the action, and this person gets to dip their beak. And so what's happening is it's almost like a negotiation over how you're going to allocate the money, and then that shows up as the songwriting credits. Now maybe this makes sense financially, but it's ominous from a creative standpoint. And to me, it reflects the larger change in the music industry that alarms me tremendously, which is record labels are turning into intellectual property management companies, IP management, in that they're not trying to get the next great record. They're trying to build a copyright portfolio.
Right.
Ooh. That sounds like the music business to me. And that right there could be the disconnect between artists and record labels. They're not there necessarily to sell your music. They're just hoping you get a few hits, and they own the copyright, almost like Kanye with Addias. They own the patent to all his shoes. They own all the designs, all the patents to the technology. It's a very similar structure. I believe the experience that Kanye West had in the music industry, he's experiencing it in the fashion world. It's possible that one blueprint actually rules most of commerce around the world. And it could stem from the blueprint of slavery, where you basically have people working for free. That might be the blueprint of just human beings overall. We just subconsciously try to think of ourselves a lot better than that. But low key, if you look at the way things are set up, everyone's trying to escape that sort of structure within their everyday life. When it comes to work, loans, even student loans, there's just sort of a predatory existence in some of these institutional structures that we see throughout the world, not just America, but throughout the world.
Portfolio of songs. And the people that run these things are bankers, lawyers, and accountants. Now, God bless them. I love bankers.
All people who understand contract language. Do you notice that?
I love lawyers, especially lawyers working for me. I love accountants, but I want people that are guitarists and piano players and sax players and bassists and drummers. These are the people I want involved in the creative end of the music business. Now, here's a fact that you're not going to hear elsewhere because it's sort of hidden in the financial statements. Look at Universal Music Group. You said before they have 32% of the songs out there.
Right.
What people don't know is they are growing their publishing business 5 times as fast as their recorded music business. So people look at Universal Music, say, this is a recording company. Well, not for much longer, because the only thing they want to invest in is publishing rights. Now, what does this mean? Publishing rights means you own part of an old song. You might be buying a song that was written 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, whatever. When you do a recording, you're focused on the future. I'm going to create music that never existed before.
Right.
I'm going to build an artist. I'm going to build a career. It is very dangerous for the culture to have companies like Universal Music care more about the past than about the future. People ask me all the time, why is the music culture feel so stagnant? I said, this is by design. The people running these companies would rather have you listen to an old song than a new song. And this gets back to the AI, especially if in the future they fear that these AI songs are going to steal their royalties. Their response is going to be to peddle license agreements of their old songs. They're going to try to get them in TV commercials or whatever. And once again,
because they have the access to. Just keep that in mind. They have the access to pitch it for TV commercials, movies, etc. It's the same investors. So they're leveraging their copyright for the music and also their access to all these institutional projects like the next Fast and Furious movie or the next Marvel movie by Disney or whatever company owns it, or DC. And they can actually pitch their music to these companies first. A regular artist or just a regular independent artist don't have that type of access, even if they own 100% of their copyright or just their royalties or publisher.
God bless them. I hope they make a lot of money, and I hope they have the nice flight on the corporate jet and all the things that these execs want. But this is not healthy for our culture, because somebody should be investing in the future of music.
And the current generations are not going to go back and listen to some of these songs. It's not a guarantee that, especially with streaming, the way it came about out of nowhere, that people are going to go back and listen to some of these songs. It is not a guarantee. Because now the way things are curated is through algorithms. So people may be watching movies or their personal favorite content creators, and they don't necessarily have these Marvin Gaye songs from back in the day or Beatles or Michael Jackson. There's going to be a generation coming up that's not even going to have the access in their algorithm to consume that type of music. Just their algorithms might be on something completely different that doesn't even involve music or involves music that's current day to them. That's one thing these record label executives never consider.
And if all the large companies want is these old songs, we're in trouble. And it's not just Universal Music Group. Sony's doing the same thing. They just cut a $500 million catalog purchase the other day. Concord was trying to buy this portfolio. All the record companies have lost faith in the record business. And this can't be a good thing if you love music. What they're doing fundamentally won't work for them.
Right.
In the old days, the record labels knew how to launch new stars. It's never been easy.
Right.
But at least they took care. They tried to scout good talent. They would hire a good producer. They would get good songwriters. And then they would take this new artist and they would invest in marketing. Maybe there was some payola too. I don't know. But it's basically...
Oh yeah, there was definitely payola.
They could take new stars and develop them, which they needed for their future. They had to do this. They had no choice. What you see lately is they've either lost the ability to do that or the interest in doing it, or probably both. What I see is, I actually had an A&R person from a label call me up because he wanted to argue about one of my articles. And I was going back and forth with this guy. And at one point he said, Ted, I got to admit, you're right. We would never sign a new artist now unless they already had an audience on TikTok.
Right.
I mean, basically, he was saying, we don't have a clue how to build a career.
Right.
We got to find someone who's already doing it. But what benefit is there?
There's got to be metrics to show the correlation between that TikTok audience converting into consumers of the music. Like, do they have the data on that they actually go to Spotify where that stream counts as a paid stream, or YouTube where they're running ads on that stream? Is there a conversion there? I feel like there's a magical assumption that there's a conversion with TikTok and the overall artists. There's been quite enough data to show that there's artists out there that have millions of followers on Instagram and cannot sell it a 2,000 seat venue. The metaverse and the universe, it sometimes doesn't really correlate. But I like how these tech companies, in order to proposition their product as something that's useful, as a tool, they kind of just say, hey, we're promoting artists, or we're a means of distribution to develop a certain product that consumers will love. The data has got to be more widely available on that.
For the record label at that point, because they're going to have to give away the store to sign up that people. That's already happened.
That's right. It's already
and
happened.
Back in our day, you got a record contract. If you got 10, 15% royalties, that was the best you were going to possibly do.
Yeah.
But nowadays, they have to go to these TikTok stores and say, we'll give you 50%.
That's right.
And
you wonder what deal they cut Drake. This is why, in a way, he couldn't lose to Kendrick Lamar. There had to have been a whole machine behind him designing things in a way where he can't lose. Because even with the claims that Kendrick was making against him, you've seen a lot of major publications like Billboard, all the ones that are underneath all the record labels that we know of. Billboard, Complex, the Pitchforks. A lot of these publications are really in cahoots with the record labels, but they kind of defended Drake's honor, and there's a lot of money invested in the guy. They didn't give him all that money for no reason. He's probably got to produce 10 more albums, which is insane. We're about to really watch if this guy is going to monkey dance his ass for another 10 years and really have us sitting there watching him thinking this guy really thinks that he should be a #1 artist in this culture that moves a mile a minute. Like, this shit is completely inorganic.
After 5 years, you're going to Masters, and they have to give away everything to get these people because the label has no leverage. The TikTok star does.
That's right.
So they're fundamentally pursuing a strategy that's not going to work for the record label. What they should do is, once again, I'm going back to this movie industry analogy, they should be willing to take risks. They should build up their ability to identify promising young talent.
It's hard for them to take risk because they dummy down their music product so bad that now it's just a fucking stream. To even have Spotify announce that someone listening to your music on a platform is a fraction of a penny, that in itself is the music industry dummying down their product so bad that it's almost a double trap. It's like, yeah, the record labels are getting paid on the back end with Spotify stock or just a percentage of their overall revenue, but at the end of the day, you told the public that listening to the product you guys put out, which is music, only costs a fraction of a penny per stream. It's a double-edged sword, man. The music industry kind of dummied themselves down into a corner where they can't really all of a sudden say, oh, pay $20 a month to be on our music platform, when you just told us for all these years to listen to it on Spotify was a fraction of a penny per stream. Shit doesn't make any sense. But that's the music industry always dummying down their product. When it comes to the tech, they've done it before. They've done it with Apple, with the iPod, breaking up a CD sale into individual songs for $1, and they did it with streaming. This shit is their own damn fault.
Sign them, nurture and develop that talent, and create the next generation of stars. That would be good for them, it would be good for the musician, and it would be good for us as audience members, because we have something exciting, something new, something fresh, something different, and not just we're going to peddle the license deal of a song written 30 years ago, which is, about as exciting as day-old bread.
So this conversation was a great correlation to a lot of what's going on in the industry as far as the relevance and the authenticity of what's going on, the stagnation of the culture, the angst, the feeling of release, I should say, after the Kendrick Lamar DJ Mustard's track. I forgot, Not Like Us. I'm about to forget the name of the track, but this right here is a great correlation to what's going on within the industry, and you see it play out in hip hop culture. Just the stagnation. The culture has never been this stagnant ever in its history. And for Drake to be comfortable in order to enrich just himself, he's actually become a poison to the culture. The fact that you're one of the few guys who can actually sell out stadiums, it's you and like 3 other guys. You're comfortable with that? Like, you think the culture could progress off of that? What are you doing to improve that? Besides bragging album after album, you're number one, you got a girl pinned up somewhere. It's just like the same repetitive shit. Like, the culture is just, it has major anxiety for something new. But the techies are definitely not in the business of furthering music culture. They're just into the business of furthering their platforms and kind of scaling things down on the backs of creativity, which has always been done by the music industry. But it's almost like two devils right now, the overall record labels and the streaming companies, which really had the decision to start fresh without the record labels, but they chose to partner up with them regardless. Because at the end of the day, it's all the same institutional investors. The same people who invest in Universal Music, they got their money tied up in Spotify, or they got their money tied up in Apple. It's all the same people. And just one more thing about the stagnation, we see it play out even in tech. It's gotten to a point where you got guys like Mark Zuckerberg just goes out and tries to buy out the next app or just copy it. So tech is really in an inflection point where they're starting to see the same type of stagnation. There's no real new apps. Guys are just consolidating and trying to gobble up any newcomers into the space. But I'm just going to leave it at this for today. But until next time, you fellas stay safe. Peace.